In a recent interview with Time magazine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the challenging question, can the Ukrainian people forgive Russia? His powerful response emphasized the complexity of forgiveness in wartime. The Russian people must learn the word reparation before the Ukrainian people can speak of forgiveness. As Ukraine continues its defense against Russian aggression, this statement highlights the deep emotional and political challenges of reconciliation. Zelensky's remarks delve into the psychological, social, and political dimensions of healing, reflecting on the devastating effects of war and the search for peace. Historical context of Ukraine-Russia relations. The complex relationship between Russia and Ukraine is deeply rooted in their shared history, tracing back to the medieval Kievan Rus Commonwealth. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence, a decision that was overwhelmingly supported by the people, with 92.3% of voters backing the referendum. In the years following independence, Ukraine experienced several pivotal moments that shaped its political trajectory. The 2004 Orange Revolution, sparked by allegations of vote rigging, marked a significant shift in the country's governance. This was followed by the election of pro-Russian Viktor Yanukovych in 2010, and the 2013 suspension of EU trade talks, which led to widespread protests across the nation. Throughout this period, Ukraine gradually leaned toward Western alignment, despite consistent opposition from Russia. By 2008, NATO had promised Ukraine future membership, a decision that further strained relations with Moscow. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 marked a critical turning point in Russian-Ukrainian relations. In February 2014, Russian forces seized control of Crimea, and within weeks, a controversial referendum was held, claiming that 95.5% of voters supported joining Russia. However, a leaked report from Russia's Human Rights Council revealed that the actual turnout was only 30%, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the vote. Tensions escalated further as Russia began amassing troops near Ukraine's borders in spring 2021. By November 2021, satellite images revealed a significant buildup of Russian forces, exceeding 100,000 troops. In December 2021, Russia presented a series of security demands, including the withdrawal of NATO forces from Eastern Europe, signaling the deepening rift between the two nations. The demographic shifts in Crimea, where over 140,000 ethnic Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars left the region while 250,000 Russians moved in, further exacerbated tensions. Moscow also invested more than $10 billion in subsidies to develop the annexed territory, further integrating it into Russia's sphere. This deteriorating situation culminated in February 2022, when Russian forces launched a multi-pronged invasion from Belarus, Russia, and Crimea. The invasion marked the most significant threat to European peace and security since World War II, fundamentally altering the relationship between Ukraine and Russia. The invasion has had lasting implications not only for the two nations but for global peace and stability. Zelensky's official stance on forgiveness. President Volodymyr Zelensky's stance on forgiveness toward Russia has remained firm throughout the ongoing conflict. From the outset, he has expressed a resolute position against any compromise or temporary solutions, emphasizing that such measures would only leave this wound open for future generations. Zelensky's public declarations have been unequivocal, stating that a terrorist state will not receive forgiveness, and reinforcing his commitment with statements like, "We will never forgive. We will punish every perpetrator, and Russian evil will collapse right here in Ukraine." As the conflict has progressed, Zelensky's stance has evolved in response to the escalating situation. Initially, he sought dialogue, even making unsuccessful attempts to contact Russian President Vladimir Putin before the invasion. However, as the war has intensified, his position has hardened. He has become increasingly resolute in his belief that Ukraine will ultimately prevail and has doubled down on the demand for the return of all Ukrainian territory, with no room for negotiation. This stance has earned him significant domestic support, with 69% of Ukrainians backing his presidency until martial law is lifted. Zelensky's communication strategy has resonated strongly with international audiences, with many comparing his wartime speeches to those of Winston Churchill. His addresses are marked by genuine emotional appeals, supported by factual evidence documenting Russia's attacks on civilian infrastructure. This clear and compelling messaging has garnered widespread support from the international community, particularly in his advocacy for continued Western assistance. His approach contrasts sharply with past Ukrainian diplomatic efforts, moving away from bureaucratic language and instead employing direct, emotionally charged appeals. While Zelensky acknowledges that military force alone may not be sufficient to reclaim all occupied territories, his position on forgiveness remains firmly tied to his broader strategic goal: Russia's complete withdrawal from Ukrainian soil. His leadership continues to be characterized by a steadfast commitment to national sovereignty and territorial integrity, aligning with the strong sense of resolve and unity within Ukraine. Documentation of Russian war crimes. In this context, the mounting evidence of Russian war crimes serves as a stark reminder of the brutal realities Ukraine faces. International organizations, including the United Nations, have meticulously documented the toll of this aggression, with 11,973 civilian deaths, including 622 children, recorded since Russia's invasion in February 2022. These figures underscore the human cost of the conflict and reinforce Ukraine's determination to seek justice and accountability, aligning with Zelensky's call for Russia to face the consequences of its actions. One of the most thoroughly documented examples of Russian war crimes is the Bucha massacre. Investigators from Human Rights Watch uncovered extensive evidence of summary executions, unlawful killings, and torture in the town of Bucha. Among the findings were 278 bodies discovered after Russian forces withdrew, along with 16 documented cases of unlawful killings. Disturbingly, there were multiple instances of civilians executed with their hands bound, and evidence of systematic torture in detention facilities. Beyond direct violence against civilians, Russian forces have systematically targeted civilian infrastructure throughout Ukraine, further exacerbating the suffering of the population. The Yale Humanitarian Research Lab has identified 223 attacks on power infrastructure across 23 Ukrainian oblasts. The strikes have also destroyed over 800 heat-generating facilities, 106 hospitals, 708 schools, and 109 religious buildings. These deliberate attacks on vital infrastructure appear to be part of a broader strategy to cripple Ukraine's power supply and weaken its civilian population, constituting clear violations of international humanitarian law. The international community has responded with a push for accountability. The International Criminal Court, ICC, has issued arrest warrants for several high-ranking Russian officials, marking significant progress toward justice. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine has also documented numerous violations, including the illegal use of explosive weapons, indiscriminate attacks, and sexual violence. In September 2023, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights reported the highest number of civilian casualties to date, with 208 killed and 1,220 injured. Ukraine's law enforcement agencies have launched investigations into 130,000 cases of war crimes, using sophisticated methods such as DNA analysis, mobile justice teams, forensic specialists, and international legal experts to gather evidence. These extensive efforts have prompted unprecedented international responses, with the ICC's investigation, supported by 43 states, marking an important step toward possible prosecution. The documentation and investigation of these war crimes not only serve as critical steps toward justice but also lay the groundwork for future reconciliation discussions between Ukraine and Russia. As the world watches, the pursuit of accountability remains essential in ensuring that those responsible for these heinous acts are held to account. Ukrainian public opinion. Recent surveys reveal a significant shift in Ukrainian public sentiment regarding the ongoing conflict, indicating a growing divide over how to approach the end of the war. According to a Gallup poll conducted in August and October 2024, 52% of Ukrainians now favor negotiating an end to the war as soon as possible, while 38% still prefer fighting until victory is achieved. The deep impact of the war on Ukrainian society is evident in civilian surveys on reconciliation. A staggering 78% of citizens report having relatives or friends who have either been killed or wounded in the conflict. When asked about the possibility of reconciliation, public opinion shows a complex picture. 36.3% believe reconciliation is never possible. 32.2% think it's impossible in the current generation's lifetime, and 11.9% would only consider it after war crimes trials and compensation. Additionally, 5.6% require Russian repentance before they would entertain any idea of forgiveness. Regional variations in sentiment also paint a varied picture. Support for continuing the conflict has decreased across all regions of Ukraine, but the eastern regions, closest to the front lines, demonstrate the strongest desire for peace, with 63% wanting the war to end soon. Even regions far from direct combat have seen substantial changes in attitude. For example, the Kyiv region saw a 39 percentage point decline in support for continued fighting, while western Ukraine experienced a 40 percentage point reduction in war support. Generational differences are also notable. Older Ukrainians, particularly those above 60, display stronger optimism about battlefield dynamics and higher confidence in eventual victory. They tend to support fighting until complete territorial liberation. In contrast, younger Ukrainians under 35 express more cautious views, with only 40% of those aged 18 to 25 supporting continued fighting for full territorial restoration, compared to 60% of those over 60. Military experience plays a significant role in shaping perspectives as well. Among veterans, 67% support fighting until all territory is liberated, although only 32% believe Ukraine is currently winning. This data highlights that Ukrainian society's stance on forgiveness and reconciliation is deeply complex, influenced by age, location, and personal experience with the war. While earlier in the conflict, 73% of Ukrainians preferred to fight until victory, the current landscape presents a more nuanced picture of public opinion regarding the path forward. Psychological impact on Ukrainian society. This complexity in public sentiment is further compounded by the psychological toll of Russia's invasion, which extends well beyond the battlefield. The impact on mental health is profound, with approximately 15 million Ukrainians requiring psychological support, and 3 to 4 million needing medication to manage the mental health challenges caused by the war. The trauma experienced by the population adds a layer of complexity to their views on forgiveness and the long-term reconciliation process, highlighting the intersection of personal experience, collective trauma, and the broader political landscape. The war has induced an unprecedented level of collective trauma, primarily resulting from direct exposure to military actions, the widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, continuous air raid threats, displacement from homes, and the loss of loved ones. Research indicates that individuals who have directly encountered military actions or extreme human suffering experience significantly higher levels of anxiety, depression, stress, and other trauma-related symptoms. This trauma varies in its manifestation, with those remaining in Ukraine displaying somewhat lower levels of anxiety and depression compared to those who have fled abroad. The mental health crisis caused by the war presents a stark reality across various population groups. A comprehensive study revealed that 68.2% of non-displaced persons experience moderate stress, with similar figures for internally displaced persons, 64.4%, and refugees, 64.7%. Additionally, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is prevalent, affecting 50.8% of non-displaced individuals, 55.4% of internally displaced persons, and 62.2% of refugees. Over time, the crisis has evolved, with the first year of the war marked by widespread anxiety, followed by an increasing prevalence of depression in the second year. Despite the severe psychological effects, Ukrainian society has demonstrated remarkable resilience. The full-scale invasion has, in a way, strengthened social cohesion, as the population united in response to the shared existential threat. The war has fostered an enhanced sense of civic duty, greater national belonging, and stronger horizontal relations, even amidst massive displacement. Notably, pluralism has been sustained despite the significant movement of people within and outside Ukraine. However, the psychological burden of the war differs across demographics. Older generations, particularly those who lived through the Soviet era, are often reluctant to seek mental health support due to the stigma associated with it. Furthermore, the shortage of mental health professionals, with only one psychologist available for every 100,000 people, poses a significant challenge in addressing the growing need for psychological care. This crisis presents a unique situation compared to previous conflicts, as it affects not only combatants and refugees but the entire population. While Ukrainian society has shown resilience in the face of these challenges, experts warn that mental health conditions could worsen in the long term due to ongoing polyvictimization, highlighting the urgent need for comprehensive mental health support and resources. Religious and cultural perspectives. At the same time, religious institutions have been crucial in Ukraine's resistance, shaping public discourse on forgiveness and reconciliation. Faith communities play a central role in maintaining cultural identity and social cohesion, helping to unite the population as the war challenges traditional values and societal fabric. Together, mental health support and the influence of religion are key to Ukraine's resilience and recovery. The Russian Orthodox Church's declaration of the invasion as a holy war has caused deep divisions within the Orthodox world. The ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew has strongly condemned this stance, claiming that the Russian Church cooperated in the crime of aggression and shared the responsibility. In response to the Russian Church's position, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church declared its independence in May 2022, with Metropolitan Onufry, the Church's head, denouncing Putin's actions as a repetition of the sin of Cain. Ukraine's religious demographics reflect a deeply Orthodox Christian society, with 75% of the population identifying as such, while smaller groups like the Greek Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Jews add to the religious diversity. Across different denominations, religious leaders have made distinct statements on the conflict. Ukraine's chief rabbi, Moshe Reuven Azman, has combined humanitarian efforts with public refutations of Russian claims that Nazi influences exist within Ukraine. Additionally, the Muslim community, comprising 4% of Ukraine's population, has expressed strong support for Ukraine's resistance against Russia. In the context of cultural resistance, Ukraine has seen significant efforts to remove Russian cultural symbols and dismantle Soviet-era monuments, strengthening indigenous Ukrainian traditions and identities. These changes reflect a broader cultural decolonization process that has accelerated during the war, intensifying efforts to establish a distinct Ukrainian cultural identity by restricting Russian mass culture, such as books, films, and television programs. However, the war's toll on religious infrastructure has been severe, with over 100 religious buildings documented as targets of attack. Many religious congregations have sought shelter in places of worship, as international law protects these sites from assault. Despite these hardships, religious actors have helped maintain solidarity across denominational lines, offering alternative forms of dialogue and support in the absence of political or military avenues. Religious communities in occupied territories continue to provide resistance, even as they face destruction and reprisals. Ultimately, religious institutions in Ukraine serve as pillars of strength and resilience, not only fostering resistance against foreign aggression but also preserving Ukraine's cultural and social unity during a time of unprecedented challenge. Their contributions remain critical to Ukraine's ability to endure and, perhaps, ultimately reconcile in the face of the ongoing conflict. International community response. In parallel, the international community has shown remarkable solidarity, responding to Russia's invasion with unprecedented unity. Nearly 50 countries have stepped forward, providing Ukraine with critical security assistance, including long-range artillery, tanks, armored personnel carriers, air defense missiles, and lethal UAVs. This global support strengthens Ukraine's defense capabilities, aligning with the nation's ongoing struggle to preserve its sovereignty and ensure long-term peace and stability. The United States has played a leading role, executing 55 instances of presidential drawdown authority since August 2021, amounting to approximately $31.7 billion in aid from Department of Defense stockpiles. Additionally, the U.S. Congress allocated $4.65 billion in foreign military financing. On the diplomatic front, the United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly condemned Russia's annexations, isolating the country on the global stage, with 71% of nations supporting Ukraine, compared to only 8% backing Russia. The European Union has shown strong solidarity through expanded sanctions on Russia, humanitarian aid, refugee protection, and support for war crimes investigations. The EU and its member states have committed over $241 billion in aid, with $125 billion already allocated. The US has committed $88 billion out of its $119 billion pledge. Sanctions against Russia have had a profound economic impact, freezing $5 billion in Russian central bank assets and barring its largest banks from SWIFT. The coalition supporting Ukraine extends beyond traditional Western allies, with 13 members leading various coalitions focused on critical military capabilities. Together, these partners have contributed over $59 billion in security assistance. The collective international efforts have significantly enhanced Ukraine's defensive capabilities, with U.S.-funded campaigns reaching over 18 million Ukrainians and providing critical information on explosive ordnance risks. This global response has not only bolstered Ukraine's resilience but also highlighted the power of international unity in the face of aggression. However, as Ukraine navigates the path toward recovery, establishing lasting peace with Russia presents numerous challenges. Beyond the military considerations, the scale of destruction and human suffering inflicted during the conflict makes reconciliation a complex and long-term process. Ukraine's reconstruction will require an estimated $500 billion, addressing essential aspects such as the withdrawal of Russian forces, the restoration of territorial integrity, the implementation of security guarantees, economic rebuilding, and the establishment of justice mechanisms for war crimes. Moreover, meaningful reconciliation requires profound political and social changes within Russia, making peace a generational process. This comprehensive approach will be vital in the long-term effort to achieve stability and ensure that Ukraine can heal and rebuild from the conflict's devastation. Future implications for peace. Ukraine's reconstruction will require an estimated $500 billion, addressing essential aspects such as the withdrawal of Russian forces, the restoration of territorial integrity, the implementation of security guarantees, economic rebuilding, and the establishment of justice mechanisms for war crimes. Moreover, meaningful reconciliation requires profound political and social changes within Russia, making peace a generational process. This comprehensive approach will be vital in the long-term effort to achieve stability and ensure that Ukraine can heal and rebuild from the conflict's devastation. The prerequisites for dialogue are starkly different on both sides. Russian President Vladimir Putin insists on the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from certain regions, Ukraine's abandonment of NATO membership plans, and the acceptance of neutral status. Meanwhile, Ukraine remains resolute in its demand for the restoration of pre-2014 borders. These fundamentally opposed positions highlight the difficulty of finding common ground and reaching a peaceful resolution. The long-term consequences of the conflict will profoundly affect European security for decades. With over 14.6 million people in need of humanitarian aid, the war has caused severe economic damage, including destroyed infrastructure and reduced industrial capacity, especially in eastern Ukraine. The security implications could lead to military buildups lasting years and accelerated weapons development. Socially, the war has displaced millions, torn apart families, and destroyed communities. Even after hostilities cease, political tensions between Russia and much of Europe will persist for years. Military experts predict that NATO and Russia will continue substantial military buildups, and arms control efforts will face significant hurdles. To address these challenges, G7 nations have committed $50 billion in loans for Ukraine's reconstruction, alongside the release of approximately $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. As Ukraine continues its path to recovery, the country must remain united and resolute in rebuilding its economy and institutions. Achieving peace will require addressing complex factors like territorial control, economic damage, population displacement, security, and defense investments. A gradual approach, such as demilitarized zones and international mediation, may offer a way forward. NATO's continued support will be pivotal in maintaining stability and ensuring long-term peace. As the situation evolves, how do you think international cooperation can further help Ukraine in this critical time?